Chapter 1. The Arrival. The winds of Alaria swept violently across the landscape, howling as if they carried the collective sorrow of an entire planet, a planet that had once thrived with vibrant life and harmony, but now lay in ruins. Towering, jagged mountains, broken and crumbling under the weight of centuries of neglect, cast their long shadows over what had been the remains of a great civilization. The skies, once a radiant mix of blues and purples, were now a dull, lifeless gray, shrouded in thick clouds that blocked out the sun, making the air even more oppressive than it already was. It had been hundreds of years since Alaria had been abandoned, but in the quietest moments, it was as though the planet itself still mourned its lost glory. On the edges of this forgotten world, hidden beneath the overgrown remnants of ancient buildings and beneath the remnants of ruins that had once been bustling cities, a small figure darted between shadows. Lyra, the tiny alien girl, was no taller than the length of a human hand, her slender, silvery form a stark contrast to the darkened, decaying surroundings. Her translucent wings fluttered nervously behind her, catching glimmers of the faintest light that managed to break through the oppressive clouds above. The creature known to her kind as the Archeans had once ruled this world with immense intelligence, harnessing the energies of the planet to create civilizations that spanned miles, with cities that towered above the clouds, teeming with culture and technological wonders that would leave even the most advanced races of the universe in awe. Yet now, here she was, hiding in the remains of her ancestors' greatest achievements, trying to survive. The towering statues, half buried in the sand, served as grim reminders of a time when things were different, before the cataclysm, before the war, before the inevitable destruction of everything she had known. Lyra was not the only one left on Alaria, though she had no real knowledge of the others anymore. For years, she had roamed this wasteland in search of a way to survive, her only company the occasional sparse life forms that had somehow managed to cling to existence in the harsh new conditions of the planet. Her people, the Archeans, had once been part of a sophisticated society. Their technology had been unparalleled, their capacity for innovation far beyond the understanding of even the most advanced species of the galaxy. But then the war had come, a war that shattered not only their empire, but also the very fabric of their civilization. Their technology had turned on them. Civilizations crumbled, and vast networks of energy were disrupted beyond repair, forcing the Archeans to flee their own world in search of refuge in the stars. Lyra's family had vanished during the final days of the war, leaving her with no memories except those scattered, fragmented pieces of history that her people had left behind in their flight. The great ships that had once carried her people across the universe had long since vanished, leaving nothing behind but debris and silence. And now, she was the last one left. Her heart pounded against her chest as she paused to listen, crouching behind a broken column that once formed part of the central city. The air was thick with tension. She could hear the footsteps now, heavy and methodical, something moving just beyond her sight, their presence unmistakable. Humans. The very word sent a shiver down her spine, and her wings twitched instinctively in a mix of fear and anticipation. They had arrived in their strange ships, gliding down from the skies as they had done so many times before. And each time, they came for something. They didn't belong here, they were the outsiders, the ones who sought to take what was left of her people's broken legacy, their forgotten worlds. Would they find her this time? Would they finally realize she existed, the last of the Archeans? Her instincts told her to run, to hide deeper in the shadowed corners of the ruins, to avoid detection at all costs, but something made her hesitate. The same curiosity that had driven her to explore the vast expanse of Alaria for so long now kept her frozen in place. Humans had come before, but never had one ventured so close. She had always been careful, always hidden herself in the nooks and crannies of the decaying world, but today was different. She couldn't help but wonder who were these humans? What did they want? She had never seen one this close before, and the strange machines they used to explore her world fascinated her, though they also frightened her. What were they looking for? Were they here to destroy the remnants of her people entirely, or were they after something far more precious, something only she knew existed? As she peeked around the corner of the column, her sharp alien eyes caught sight of the human figures, clad in strange, military garb, dark green uniforms, and heavy boots that seemed to make the ground tremble beneath their weight. They moved with purpose, scanning the surroundings with equipment she didn't understand, their voices low and harsh. She could see their faces now, and her heart skipped a beat. They didn't look like invaders, not in the way she had imagined. Instead, there was something about them, something that hinted at curiosity, even awe. But fear still gripped her chest as she shifted back into hiding, careful to keep her presence undetected. Lyra could hear their footsteps grow closer, the sound of their movement far more confident now. They were exploring the ruins, touching the ancient walls, running their fingers over the strange writing of her people. She watched, hidden, as one of the humans knelt down and examined a piece of broken technology, a relic of the Arcane's power. It wasn't the first time a human had shown interest in her people's creations, but it was the first time they had gotten this close. She had learned to avoid them, to steer clear of their advanced machinery and curiosity. But something about the way this group moved, how they observed, how they worked together made her hesitate. They didn't seem like the typical invaders. Her mind raced as the human group moved deeper into the ruins, their voices mixing with the howling winds that still roared across the landscape. She couldn't stay hidden forever, though. Her wings, though small, were powerful, but their fluttering could give her position away if she wasn't careful. She stayed low, watching them, trying to determine their next move. What did they want? Why were they here? Before she could decide her next step, a sudden movement caught her eye. One of the humans, he was different from the others, had broken away from the group, walking in her direction. Her heart raced. She froze, not daring to move. His eyes, hidden beneath the brim of his helmet, scanned the area methodically, as though he knew someone was watching him, but couldn't quite place where. And then, he saw her. Lyra froze, her wings tensing as she held her breath, praying that the human would move on. But instead, his gaze seemed to lock onto hers. For a moment, time seemed to slow. There was something in his expression, curiosity, but also caution. Lyra's instincts screamed at her to flee, to escape into the safety of the shadows and never look back, but something made her hesitate. His face was different from the others. He wasn't angry, wasn't carrying the same invasive energy that had driven so many humans to ravage her homeworld. Instead, there was something genuine in his gaze. "I see you, little one," he murmured, his voice barely a whisper, as though he didn't want to scare her off. A gentle tone. Lyra couldn't understand the words, but the softness of his tone reached her, soothing the panic that had started to surge through her. Her body, tense and ready to flee, remained still, as though her very essence was caught between fear and curiosity. She had never had a human speak to her like this. Never had one seen her without wanting to capture her, study her, or worse. And yet, this human, there was something different about him. "It's okay, little one. I won't hurt you," he said again, moving cautiously, lowering his weapon so as not to make any sudden movements. His voice was strangely comforting, warm, and it made Lyra feel safe for the first time in years. Her heart pounded in her chest as she stared at him, the uncertainty that had always guided her actions swirling into a complex dance of emotions. The human before her was not what she expected. She had feared that meeting them would mean capture, experimentation, and worse, but the fear that had gripped her heart began to shift, replaced by an unexpected flicker of hope. Lyra's tiny body trembled as she watched him, still unsure of what to do next. This was the moment she had feared for so long, the moment when her life, her safety, her future could all be decided by the unknown intentions of the humans who had arrived on her world. But as the human knelt down, offering her a hand palm open, inviting her to trust him, Lyra was torn between the overwhelming urge to flee and the equally powerful desire to reach out. Could she trust him? Could she risk it? The air around Lyra seemed to crackle with anticipation. Her tiny form, hidden just out of sight in the crumbling ruins, watched intently as the human knelt, his face softening with an expression of gentle curiosity, unlike the stern expressions of the other soldiers who had passed through her world. His helmet reflected the faint rays of the distant sun that barely pierced the oppressive cloud cover, but it didn't obscure the warmth in his eyes. The voice that had spoken to her was calm, patient, almost as if he was trying to coax her from a hidden corner of the past. But she couldn't afford to be mistaken. There was something deeply ingrained within her instincts, the survival instinct that screamed for her to flee, to hide, to remain unseen. And yet, here she was, trapped in the delicate balance of fear and hope, two opposing forces warring inside her. What could this human want from her? Why had he approached? She could feel the weight of his gaze on her, a gaze that wasn't one of malice or greed, but of something else, curiosity, perhaps, or maybe even a shred of empathy. She had never experienced that emotion from the creatures who had come to her world before. Their pursuit was always for something self-serving. Power, resources, knowledge, things she could never fully comprehend. But this human, his body language open and non-threatening, didn't seem to want anything except to understand. Lyra felt the tiniest shift in her wings, a flutter that betrayed her apprehension. It was so soft, so imperceptible, but she feared it might give her away. Her heart pounded harder in her chest, her tiny pulse racing with the intensity of the moment. Her mind spun in circles, trying to determine the right course of action. Should she risk the unknown? Should she trust this human, who had appeared in the middle of a desolate battlefield of her own making? The silence stretched on for what felt like an eternity, her body rigid with uncertainty. He still hadn't moved, and the tension in the air felt thick, as if the very world was holding its breath. She barely even noticed the sound of the wind picking up again, swirling the dust and sand around them, until the human spoke once more. His voice was a quiet murmur, a soft vibration that seemed to calm her. "You don't have to be afraid. I'm not here to hurt you," he said, and something about his tone softened the edge of her fear, just a little. "I'm not here to capture you either. I promise." He paused, looking at her, his brow furrowing slightly in confusion, but he remained still, not advancing any closer. His stance was one of patience, but there was something else there, something that spoke of a familiarity with the unknown, of someone used to dealing with things outside the realm of ordinary understanding. She could sense his internal conflict, a sense of understanding that was far beyond the greed she had come to associate with humans. The pause that followed was nearly unbearable. Her wings twitched again, the iridescent surfaces catching the dimming light, but she still didn't move. The thought of escape surged within her, but something deeper held her rooted in place. There was no escape here, not from the endless cycles of flight, not from the profound loneliness that had haunted her since the war had left her orphaned on this dying world. The future had seemed so bleak, so devoid of hope. And now, just as she thought she had come to terms with her existence here in the ruins, this human had appeared, a new variable in a life that had been defined by desolation. Lyra swallowed, the dryness in her throat making it almost impossible to speak. Her thoughts were a whirlpool, spinning faster and faster, but only one question emerged. Could she trust him? Was there something else beneath the surface of his calm demeanor? Would he capture her? Take her to places she didn't want to be? Or was there something she had not yet grasped about him, something that could change everything? The answer seemed so far away, so out of her reach. But something in the air, something in his tone, told her that now was not the time to run. With a small breath, Lyra took a hesitant step forward, feeling the pulse of energy from her tiny body reverberate through the air. She extended a tentative, trembling arm, her claws gently outstretched, unsure but moving nonetheless. The human's eyes widened slightly as he noticed her approach, but he remained perfectly still, his gaze soft and waiting. Then, for the first time, Lyra found herself doing something she never thought possible. She let out a soft, almost imperceptible sigh and, with great hesitation, lowered her guard. The human, seeing this, extended his hand toward her slowly, carefully, almost as if he knew this was a moment she needed to control. She could feel the heat radiating from his hand, the warmth of his skin, and for a brief second, it was like the world had paused. There was a strange trust between them, fragile as it was, but it was there. With no words spoken, no promises made, the unspoken bond between them had formed. Arya could feel her wings gently fold behind her, as if they, too, were trying to settle into something softer, less fearful. She reached out, hesitantly at first, her fingers brushing against his hand, almost questioning what might happen. And then nothing. No alarms blared, no sudden shift in the atmosphere, no sign that something terrible was going to occur. Instead, she felt a sense of calm wash over her, a soothing relief she hadn't realized she needed. This moment was new, different from all the moments that had come before. His voice, when it came again, was a gentle whisper, like a secret shared between the two of them. "I'm not going to hurt you, little one. You have my word." It was a strange thing to hear. A human, a species that had come to her world to take what they wanted, offering something she hadn't expected. Kindness. Trust. Lyra's heart still beat fast, But it was no longer from the fear of capture. It was from the strange thrill of an unexpected turn in the story of her life. Perhaps this moment could change everything. Perhaps things could finally be different. Chapter 2. The Unexpected Ally. The air around Lyra felt lighter, as though the burden of her loneliness had somehow lifted. She had always been the outsider, the last of her kind, forever running, always hiding, constantly feeling the weight of loss and fear. The humans who had come before had been invasive, relentless, and indifferent to the lives of those they encountered. They came to conquer, to strip away the remnants of what had once been. But this human, he was different. There was a softness to him, an understanding that Lyra had never associated with anyone from the outside world. As she stood there, her wings fluttering cautiously in the shifting winds, she found herself facing an unfamiliar reality, one that wasn't shaped by the constant need for survival. The human didn't reach for her again, but his presence, so calm and steady, remained. He allowed her the space to make her own choice, to move as she felt most comfortable. His patience was both a relief and a mystery. She had never encountered a being like this before. He stood as an enigma in the midst of a dying world, someone who appeared to offer understanding where there had once been only fear and conflict. But why? What had led him to her? Why had he come to this forsaken world, of all places? What do you want? The question slipped from Lyra's lips before she could stop it. The words felt strange, but they were the only ones she could manage. The human tilted his head slightly, seemingly unfazed by the directness of the inquiry. "I'm not here for your planet," he said, his tone quiet yet resolute. "I'm here for you." Lyra stared at him, her tiny form frozen in disbelief. "Me? Why me?" she asked, her voice still soft, though the curiosity was evident. She couldn't fathom why he would care. Her kind was nearly extinct, and those who had survived were scattered, isolated, hidden in corners of the galaxy no one bothered to explore. She had been alone for so long, her world reduced to ruins, a memory of greatness lost to time. The human smiled softly, his hand lowering back to his side. "I know you're not the last of your kind, and I know you've been alone for a long time. I don't know why you're here, or what you're hiding from, but I can help." Lyra felt her heart twist. Could he be trusted? Could she finally begin to trust someone again after everything that had happened to her world? The deep scars of loss ran through her soul, but this human, standing before her, was offering a way out. It was too much to understand all at once, too much to process. But there was something about his presence that felt different. It wasn't the kind of approach she had expected, it wasn't filled with greed or violence. But instead, a strange warmth that she had almost forgotten was possible. Her wings twitched again, a response to the changing emotions running through her. Perhaps, just perhaps, this human could be the unexpected ally she needed. Maybe, for once, she could take a chance on something new, on something hopeful. "I don't know if I can trust you, human, but I will follow you for now." Lyra spoke the words before she could second-guess herself, her wings folding behind her. The human nodded, a small smile crossing his face. "That's all I ask. Let's figure this out together." The wind howled softly through the shattered ruins, as though the planet itself was mourning the broken civilization that had once been here. Lyra, still hesitant, moved slowly alongside the human, her small body tucked into the shadows of the broken stone and fallen pillars that littered the landscape. His presence was strange, but the more she watched him, the more she realized there was a sense of calm about him, something she hadn't felt in years. Her wings fluttered lightly, the energy of uncertainty still running through her. But there was a strange connection forming between them, something that had never existed between her and the humans she had encountered before. In fact, she had spent her entire life running from them, hiding in the remnants of her ancestors' once great world, terrified of what they might do if they found her. Yet now, as she moved alongside him, something inside her whispered that this was different. They didn't speak much during the short walk through the ruins, but the silence wasn't awkward, it was filled with understanding. The human, for reasons she could not explain, seemed to understand the weight of her past, the burden she carried with her, even though he had only just encountered her. As they moved through the desolation of her homeworld, there was a sense of purpose, a quiet determination in his stride, as if he knew exactly what he was doing, and somehow, it made her feel less alone. His movements were careful, calculated, but not in the way one would expect from someone who might be preparing for a confrontation. His eyes were constantly scanning the horizon, But there was an underlying concern, the kind of concern one might have for a wounded animal or a lost child. The humanity in his eyes was genuine, and for the first time in years, Lyra felt a flicker of something she had almost forgotten: trust. They reached a small alcove within the ruins, a shelter of sorts, built into the side of one of the remaining structures. It wasn't much, just enough to offer some protection from the elements, but it was here that the human finally spoke again, his voice quiet, but firm. "I know you're scared, Lyra, but I promise you, I won't hurt you." Lyra stood still for a moment, her wings folding tighter against her back. She had seen fear in humans before, but it had always been coupled with greed, with the desire to control and possess. This man, though, seemed different. She didn't understand how, but somehow, the way he spoke, the way he looked at her, made her want to believe him. She had been alone for so long, fighting to survive in a world that no longer had a place for her people, and the simple kindness he offered felt like a lifeline, something she never thought she would find in this harsh, empty world. "I don't know what to do, human." Her voice was quiet, barely a whisper as she stepped closer to him, her eyes uncertain. "I'm the last one. I'm the only one left." The human's face softened, and he crouched down to her level, keeping his distance but giving her the space to decide if she wanted to approach. The way he acted, it was as if he wasn't just looking at her like a specimen, like an object of study, but as a living being, someone with feelings, fears, and history. "You're not alone anymore, Lyra. Not if you don't want to be." For the first time, Arya felt a strange warmth settle in her chest, an emotion she hadn't allowed herself to feel in years. The moment she had dreaded for so long, contact with a human, was not the nightmare she had imagined. The human wasn't trying to capture her or destroy her. He was offering her something she never thought possible: companionship, trust. She looked up at him, her wings vibrating lightly. "Why? Why would you help me?" The question hung in the air between them, and she could feel the tension building as the human paused. For a moment, she thought he might not answer, that he might turn away and leave her, just like everyone else who had walked away from her in the past. But he didn't. Instead, his gaze softened, and his lips parted slightly, as though trying to find the words to explain something so deeply complex, something Lyra wasn't sure she could comprehend. "Because I've seen what the war has done to this world, to people like you. I've seen the hurt, the destruction, and I've spent my whole life trying to make things right." He paused, his eyes searching her own. "I don't know what your kind went through, but I do know this: no one should be alone in this world, especially not when there's a way out." Lyra's heart beat faster at his words. She had spent her entire existence in solitude, hiding from the remnants of humanity that had ravaged her world, but here was someone who saw her as something more than a relic of a long-gone species. Someone who saw her as a person. It was such a strange feeling, one that she hadn't known in years. The walls that had once surrounded her heart formed out of pain, fear, and loss began to crack, just a little. Maybe, just maybe, she could finally trust him. Chapter 3. A New Beginning. The days that followed were filled with a quiet tension, but also an undeniable shift in the way Lyra saw the human. She had begun to follow him, albeit cautiously, as he moved through the ruins. He wasn't like the others. There was no greed in his movements, no desire to take what wasn't his. Instead, he seemed to want to understand, to connect. There was no hurry in his actions. He wasn't trying to rush her or demand answers. He was patient, waiting for her to open up to him at her own pace. And for the first time in her life, Lyra didn't feel like a prisoner to the circumstances around her. The very concept of trust was foreign to her, but this human, his presence was different. His kindness was almost overwhelming, and yet it was exactly what she had needed all this time. "Where are we going now?" Lyra asked one evening, as the two of them sat together in the shelter of a broken building, far from the battlefront. It wasn't much, but it felt like home, a small refuge from the endless storm that raged outside. She had followed the human across miles of decaying landscape, hiding from the occasional patrols that moved through the planet's surface. She had asked him many questions, but each time, he had been patient, answering her when she was ready. "We're going to get you off this planet." His voice was confident, but not boastful, as if he had been planning this from the moment they had met. "There are still others out there, Lyra, people who can help. And I'm not leaving you here, not like this." Lyra's heart fluttered, the fluttering of her wings mimicking the hope that was beginning to fill her. He was serious. He wasn't just saying words to comfort her. There was a sense of determination in his tone, and it was clear he meant every word. The thought of leaving Alaria, of leaving the remains of her home, was both terrifying and exhilarating. The idea of starting over, of being in a place where she could be free, was something she had dreamed of for so long. "Where will we go?" Lyra asked, the question catching in her throat. She had no real sense of where they would go, what would come next. All she knew was that she couldn't stay on this dying planet forever. The human smiled at her, his eyes soft, but filled with conviction. "There are places out there where you can live in peace, Lyra, where you can be yourself, not just a remnant of the past. You don't have to keep hiding anymore." Lyra didn't know what the future held, but for the first time in years, she felt a sense of possibility, something she hadn't allowed herself to feel in so long. "Thank you." Her voice was barely a whisper, but the sincerity in her words rang through the quiet space between them. The human reached out, placing a hand gently on her shoulder. "No need to thank me. We're in this together." And for the first time in a long time, Lyra allowed herself to believe that maybe, just maybe, there was still a place for her in the universe. The future, unknown as it was, suddenly didn't feel so bleak. As the days passed, Lyra and the human whom she learned was named Elias began to fall into a new rhythm. Their bond, though tentative at first, grew stronger with each shared moment. They traveled deeper into the heart of the abandoned ruins, weaving through structures that had once been filled with life, but now stood empty, like the husks of a once thriving civilization. Despite the desolation around them, there was something incredibly grounding in the presence of another living being who understood. The journey was difficult. They had to be careful, staying low to the ground and out of sight of the occasional Dominion patrol that passed through the area. Lyra had never traveled far from the ruins that had been her home for as long as she could remember, but she was learning quickly to trust Elias. He always seemed to know exactly where to go, when to stop, and when to move forward again. She marveled at how he worked with the terrain, his every action smooth and practiced, as if he had been doing this for years. But still, there was always something in his eyes, something that hinted at the burden he carried. His mission wasn't just to find a way to get Lyra off the planet. It was something deeper than that. She could sense the weight of it when he looked at her, a subtle sorrow that seemed to lie beneath his calm demeanor. At night, they would find shelter, hiding in the remnants of old buildings, where Elias would make a small fire just enough to cook food or warm themselves, but never enough to attract attention. As they ate, they would talk. The first conversations had been sparse, cautious, both of them feeling each other out. Lyra spoke little of her past at first. There was a part of her that was still too raw, too uncertain to share everything she had been through. She had told him bits and pieces, small fragments of the Arcane's history, her life before the war, but she kept the deeper truths hidden. Her voice often faltered when she spoke of her ancestors, of the things they had created, and the way the war had ripped everything apart. Elias listened without judgment, but as the days wore on, Lyra found herself opening up more. She told him of her people's downfall, of how the Arcanes had created magnificent cities that reached the sky, and how their advanced technology had been turned against them in a moment of betrayal. She spoke of the war, the destruction, and the loneliness she had lived with for so long. Elias, for his part, didn't offer empty words of comfort. He simply listened, his gaze never wavering, his eyes showing a depth of understanding that Lyra had never known before. There were no promises of saving her people, no grand declarations of how everything would work out. Instead, Elias offered something much more valuable: presence. The kind of presence that only another person could provide, the kind that made her feel less isolated. There were times, late in the evenings when the world was quiet, that Elias would share bits of his own past. He told her of his homeworld, a place far from here, surrounded by lush forests and deep, blue oceans. He spoke of his family, of how he had been a soldier in his youth, much like the soldiers of the Dominion, but unlike them, he had turned his back on the endless wars, choosing instead to help those who needed it. Elias had been a freedom fighter, a renegade who had joined the resistance to take down the very empire he had once fought for. He didn't dwell on the details, but it was clear that the weight of those years had left its mark on him, just as the war had on Lyra. Sometimes, it feels like we're all just pieces of something bigger, trying to figure out where we fit, Elias said one night, as they sat around the fire. His voice was soft, but it carried the heaviness of all the years he had lived through. Lyra, for the first time in a long while, found herself agreeing with him. She had been so focused on survival, on getting by from day to day, that she had forgotten what it felt like to think about the bigger picture. The war had taken everything from her, but it had also given her the chance to find someone who might understand. In the following days, they pressed on, Lyra more determined than ever to leave Valeria behind. But as they ventured farther away from the ruins, deeper into the heart of the planet, something began to change in the air. The climate shifted, the winds grew colder, and the sky darkened in a way that felt unnatural. It was as though the planet itself was trying to fight back, to stop them from leaving. But they couldn't afford to turn back now. Every step they took, every mile that put more distance between them and the ruins, was a step closer to freedom. One evening, after a long day of traveling, Elias stopped suddenly, holding up a hand. "We've got company." His voice was low, tense. Lyra's heart skipped a beat. The Dominion patrols were close, far closer than she had expected. Elias quickly motioned for her to follow him, and they slipped into the underbrush, hiding beneath the cover of broken trees and the overgrown foliage. Lyra's pulse raced, but Elias remained calm, his eyes scanning the area with the precision of someone who had been in countless situations like this before. She barely dared to breathe as the Dominion forces passed by, their mechanical footfalls reverberating through the ground. They were close, but they didn't see them. The danger passed, but Lyra couldn't shake the feeling that they weren't just being hunted by the Dominion anymore. There was something else at play here, something deeper that neither of them fully understood. The planet had become hostile, almost as if the remnants of the Arkeans were alive, still fighting against the human presence. That night, as they sat in the safety of their shelter, the fire crackling softly between them, Elias spoke again, his voice quiet but serious. "We're not alone out here, Lyra. There's something else happening on this planet, something ancient. I felt it." Lyra looked at him, her wings fluttering slightly in nervous anticipation. "What do you mean?" Elias stared into the fire, his gaze distant. "I don't know yet, but I think it's connected to the Arkeans. I've heard stories, legends from explorers who've come here. Something powerful is buried on this planet. It's why the Dominion is so interested in it. But they don't know everything. Not yet." Lyra felt a chill run down her spine. Powerful? The word resonated in a way she didn't fully understand. The Arkeans had been known for their power, their ancient energy, but it had all been lost in the war, consumed by time and destruction. What was Elias talking about? What did he mean by something buried here? "I don't understand, Elias. If the Dominion is after this power, then why haven't they found it yet?" Lyra asked, her voice trembling slightly. "They've been digging in the wrong places." Elias's response was cryptic but certain. "But we'll find it, Lyra. We have to." The conversation left her with more questions than answers, but one thing was clear. Their journey was far from over. It wasn't just about survival anymore. It was about something much bigger. The planet, the Arkeans, the Dominion, all of it was tied together. Lyra had no choice but to follow Elias, to trust him as they ventured into unknown territory, facing not only the Dominion but the secrets of her people's past. Chapter 4. The Revelation. The following days brought more tension. The closer they got to what Elias had hinted at, the more intense the feeling grew. The land seemed to shift, its very pulse changing, as though something ancient was awakening beneath the surface. As they approached the deepest part of Valeria, the ruins became more pronounced, more concentrated. Here, the remnants of Arkean technology were far more advanced than anything they had encountered before. The energy fields that hummed beneath the ground were almost palpable, and Elias's theories began to take form. One evening, as they explored deeper into a particularly ancient temple, Lyra felt something stir beneath her feet. A vibration, a resonance that echoed through her entire being. She paused, her wings trembling as a strange energy enveloped her. It was as if something was calling to her, reaching out across the vast expanse of time. "Elias," she whispered, fear creeping into her voice. "Do you feel that?" Elias was silent for a moment, his expression unreadable as he turned to face her. Then, he nodded slowly. "It's real. It's here." Together, they moved forward, guided by the strange hum that grew louder as they approached the center of the temple. What was hidden here? What was the Arkean legacy they were about to unearth? As they reached the heart of the temple, a massive glowing crystal stood before them, pulsing with energy. This was it, the source of the power Elias had sensed, the key to everything. And as Lyra stepped forward, her fingers brushing against the smooth surface of the crystal, the revelation came. Her people hadn't just been technologically advanced, they had been connected to something far greater. The crystal held the essence of arcane power, a force that could reshape the universe, a force that the Dominion would stop at nothing to control. Elias's voice broke the silence. This is what they were after. This is why we came here. And as the crystal's energy surged through her, Lyra realized that her journey, her purpose, was far more significant than she had ever imagined. The moment her fingertips brushed against the smooth surface of the ancient relic, the planet seemed to come alive beneath her. The hum of energy, once a faint whisper, now roared in her ears, filling her body with an overwhelming surge of power. Her heart raced as the pulse of the crystal resonated deep within her, as if it recognized her presence, as if it knew she was the last of her kind, the last hope of the Arcanes. Lyra gasped, stepping back, her wings vibrating uncontrollably as the power surged through her. The world around her began to shift, and she could feel the weight of history pressing down on her shoulders. The crystal wasn't just an artifact, it was the source of her people's legacy, the key to their civilization's unparalleled power. It had been left behind, hidden, waiting for the right person to come into contact with it. And that person, it seemed, was her. The ground trembled beneath her feet, and the air thickened with energy. Elias, who had been standing behind her, watched in awe, his face a mixture of wonder and fear. "Lyra, what's happening?" Her voice was shaky, but she could feel the words forming inside her mind, rising from some ancient part of her consciousness she had never known existed. I think it's recognizing me, Elias. It's responding to me." The energy was alive, and it was calling to her, urging her to do something, to understand something she couldn't quite grasp. Elias took a cautious step forward, sensing the danger and the potential power emanating from the crystal. "What does it want from you?" Lyra didn't have an answer. She had no idea what was happening or how to control it. The only thing she felt was the overwhelming connection to this power, this legacy of the Arcanes. Her mind swirled with visions, fragments of memories that were not her own. Images of the Arcane people, of their towering cities, their great machines harnessing the energies of the stars, their unimaginable technologies that had once reshaped entire galaxies. The crystal was not just a relic. It was alive, a part of the ancient system that had connected the Arcanes to the universe itself. And then, through the chaos of swirling energy, one image stood out clearer than the rest. A face, her mother's face, smiling softly at her, as though she had known this moment would come, as though she had waited for it. The visions were fleeting, and as quickly as they had appeared, they were gone, but their impact was undeniable. Her mother's presence, her legacy, was tied to this power. "You were meant for this, Lyra," Elias whispered, his voice filled with awe and disbelief. He stood back, watching as Lyra continued to channel the energy of the crystal, unsure of the consequences. The Arcanes, they left this behind for a reason. This isn't just about survival. It's about restoring what was lost. Lyra, still overwhelmed, nodded slowly, her mind struggling to comprehend the depth of what was unfolding. The crystal had been a dormant force, but now, it was awakening to her. She had always known she was different, the last of her kind, the last of the Arcanes. But now, standing here in the heart of her people's greatest achievement, she realized that she was more than just a survivor. She was the key to the future, the bridge between the past and whatever was to come. The crystal's energy surged once again, flooding her with visions, but now, she was no longer passive. She was in control, connected to the power of her ancestors in a way that had never been possible before. The arcane technology within her mind began to synchronize with the crystal, allowing her to harness the power of her people. But as the energy swirled around her, something else began to shift. The ground beneath her feet cracked, and the air thickened with the ominous hum of something approaching. Her eyes widened in realization. "Elias, we need to go?" "Now," Lyra shouted, her voice tinged with urgency. Elias turned to her, his eyes wide with concern. He saw it too, the Dominion forces were closing in. They had followed them. They had sensed the energy of the crystal and were now converging on their location, intent on taking it by force. Lyra's heart raced. She could feel the weight of the crystal's power, the incredible energy it contained, and she knew the Dominion would stop at nothing to possess it. They would never let her leave this planet alive if they discovered the true nature of what was hidden here. "Elias, you have to help me." Lyra's voice cracked as she looked up at him. Her wings fluttered rapidly, her body tense with the intense strain of harnessing the crystal's energy. Elias stepped forward, reaching for her hand. "I'm with you. Whatever happens, we do this together." With that, Lyra took a deep breath, closing her eyes as she focused on the energy within her. The ground beneath her began to glow, the power of the crystal extending outward like a pulse, rippling through the air. She could feel the Dominion soldiers closing in, could hear the heavy footsteps of their mechanized units as they neared. But Lyra was no longer just a small, frightened girl. She was the last of her people, and now, she had the power to protect what was left of her world. With a swift motion, she raised her hands, and the ground shattered, sending a wave of energy crashing outward, knocking the approaching enemy soldiers off their feet. The crystal's power surged, creating a protective barrier around the ruins, a force field that would shield them from the Dominion's attack. "Run!" Lyra shouted to Elias as she focused all her energy on maintaining the barrier. Together, they sprinted toward the far edge of the ruins, Elias looking back only once to see the Dominion forces struggling against the protective shield Lyra had created. The sound of energy blasts and machine gunfire filled the air, but Lyra kept her focus, determined to keep the shield up just long enough to allow them to escape. As they made their way through the narrow paths between the ruins, Lyra could hear the hum of more ships arriving, the Dominion closing in on them. They were outnumbered, but they weren't out of options. "Not yet. We have to get to the shuttle, Lyra. It's our only chance," Elias said, urgency clear in his voice. They reached the small ship they had used to get here, a clunky, old model, but it was fast enough to outrun the Dominion if they could get it airborne in time. But as they reached the shuttle, Lyra felt a cold rush of wind. The crystal's energy was beginning to wane. She couldn't hold it forever. The Dominion was closing in. "Lyra, we have to go now," Elias shouted. But before they could board the shuttle, the Dominion commander appeared, his figure outlined by the glow of distant explosions. "You cannot escape with what belongs to us, little alien. The arcane power will be ours." Lyra stepped forward, her small frame standing tall against the overwhelming presence of the commander. Her wings flared, and she raised her hands. The crystal's energy was pulsing weakly within her, but it was enough for this moment. "You will never control it," she said, her voice steady, unwavering. The crystal's final surge of power exploded outward, sending a shockwave of light and energy that knocked the commander off his feet, sending him flying back into the ruins. With that, Lyra and Elias dove into the shuttle, the engines roaring to life as the ship ascended. The Dominion forces, stunned by the unexpected attack, scrambled to regroup, but it was too late. Lyra and Elias were already leaving Ilaria behind, breaking free from the chains of the planet's haunted past. As the shuttle shot into the skies, leaving the smoldering ruins of Ilaria below them, Lyra felt a sense of hope for the first time in her life. The journey wasn't over. There would be more challenges, more battles, but for now, the future was finally hers to shape. And, for the first time, she wasn't alone. The universe, once so vast and unknowable, had become her new home, and she would face it, not as a survivor, but as a force of change.